Organ transplantation surgery is very important to the health of our society today. Each day, organ transplants save the lives and improve the lives of many people across the world. These surgeries have improved and changed a lot over the course of time, and I think it's important to teach my audience more about the history of transplantation surgery and the importance of transplantation surgery. According to UNOS.org, the first successful transplant was performed in 1954, and it was a kidney transplant. In the 60s, transplants of the liver, heart, and pancreas began to become performed. These surgeries were very groundbreaking for their time, and they were very important, but they were very rare as well, and not as common as they are today, due to the fact that we were a lot more scared that the body would reject the organs, and we didn't understand how these things worked as well. However, by the 80s, these surgeries became a lot more common. The 80s were a very important time in the history of transplantation surgery, because not only did they become a lot more common in the 80s, but in the 80s, lung and intestinal transplants began to become performed. I found a lot of this information on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services website. Another important improvement in the history of transplantation surgery is that the first successful liver transplant between two living adults was first performed in 1989. This surgery was groundbreaking at the time because a surgery like this had never been performed before in the history of transplants. This surgery really paved the way for a lot of other transplantation surgeries as far as two living adults go, because before this, organs were only really harvested from people who were deceased. So this really paved the way for transplantation surgeries between two living adults with other organs. Transplantation has also become a lot more common today, as I already said, which is another important change in the history of transplantation surgery. For example, a statistic I found lists that every 10 minutes, someone is added to the National Organ Donation waiting list. Another really surprising statistic that I found states that in 2017, 34,772 patients were given organs and added to these lists, which makes it the 5th record-breaking year of all time as far as organ transplantation goes. This just really proves that over time, these surgeries have become a lot more common, and they've become a lot more adopted into everyday life, and they're a lot more understood now, because due to the fact that we understand more about these surgeries, people are able to receive these surgeries more often without so much fear about them, which I find to be really important in the history of these surgeries. Another very, very surprising and groundbreaking and innovative surgery that has also been performed as far as organ transplantation goes is the face transplant, which I found to be really surprising that it's as common as it is today. And while it's not a common surgery at all compared to these other ones, it still happens, and I just thought it was really interesting. The first ever face transplant was performed in France in 2005. I found this information from Gale Health and Wellness, and this surgery is only performed on people with birth defects or facial trauma due to the fact that people could be using these surgeries just for cosmetic purposes when they have nothing wrong with their faces at all, and they don't want to be wasting any resources. But I thought this was a very important innovation in the history of transplantation surgery because it's a very complicated surgery, and it's a newer surgery, which makes it very impressive and very different to any other surgery that's around, especially any other transplant that's around. Another change in the history of organ transplantation surgery that I found is also from Gale Health and Wellness, but it was an interview this time, and it's the fact that different uses for transplantation surgeries have been found. For example, lung transplants have begun to become performed on COVID patients, which is very groundbreaking because I've never heard about this before. And while they're not common, they are only really performed on people who are very ill with COVID. I still think it's very important to learn about because this could help a lot of people. For example, A woman named Myra Ramirez received a double lung transplant to treat COVID in June. And she was the first ever woman to receive a double lung transplant in order to treat COVID. So over time, we find more uses for these surgeries to be used, which I find to be very important. Overall, transplants have evolved over time, and not only have many new surgeries been invented, but different reasons for using these surgeries have been found. If it weren't for transplantation surgeries, many would have lost their lives or had a very decreased quality of life. I hope that from this speech you take away facts and information that you did not know before about the history of transplantation surgeries and the importance of them. The first question I'm going to be adding to my Q&A slide is, what is the reason that I chose this topic to speak on? The reason why I chose this topic to speak on is that it really interested me a lot, and I couldn't really find any other topic that captured my interest like this one did, and I really wanted to learn something new instead of just speak on something that I've already known, and this topic taught me to learn something new. The second question I'm going to be adding is, what is one fact that I've learned from the research I've done to give this speech? One fact that I've learned from the research I've done to give this speech is that the first ever transplantation surgery was a kidney transplant in 1954, which I had never known before. The third question that I'll be adding is, what is another example of another organ transplant that is done between two living adults? Another example of an organ transplant that is done between two living adults every so often that I've found is a kidney transplant. I hope you've enjoyed this speech, and I hope that you've learned something from it.